My name is Mike Tremont. I'm here moderating this session, and I'm going to invite each one of you to participate fairly early and in a fairly robust fashion as we get going here. I will introduce each one of these fellows because I think that they're terrific. I don't know them in great detail, but I think that in 45 minutes, we are all going to feel like we know them like our brothers. As for myself, I am a former police officer. I spent 11.5 years in the road in Broward County, which of course is the only reason that I would be asked to moderate this session. I was a professional economist for a couple of decades before that. And so consequently, as you might imagine, I'm a big advocate of imposing more competition and the rule of markets on the business of the rule of law. I believe that criminal justice reform will accelerate when America adopts the idea of imposing market forces on how we manage police officers and how we stop creating black markets. So having said that, that's sort of the way that I frame up this issue. I'm going to ask these guys to frame up the issue as each one of them sees fit. I don't know that it matters in which order we go, but we're going to go from Chase to Addison to Lee. Chase is the fellow I know best. I can personally vouch for the fact that he is both a smart and a nice guy, a very articulate guy. I know Chase because, I'm guessing that most of you already know Chase as well. He is seeking the presidential nomination of the Libertarian Party, so he and I run into each other frequently, and most importantly, my wife and daughter like Chase, so that's all that really matters to me. If you stay on the good side of my family, you're on the good side of me. Chase, if you don't know Chase already, let me indicate one thing. Besides just caring a lot about criminal justice and about all things libertarian, it's important that you know that Chase is the one that forced the runoff in the Senate election in Georgia between the Republican and the Democrat, thereby pissing off everyone in the United States who wasn't a libertarian. You got to say that alone is an achievement worth mentioning every chance you get. So I'm happy to mention that as well. So anyway, that's going to be Chase Oliver. Addison Hosner, he and I just met, but of course I'm a big fan of Addison because he's an attorney in Florida and has become the chief operating officer of Young Voices, which, although we've agreed that we're not going to spend too much time on biography, when it is your turn to speak, Addison, I'm going to ask you to give us 20 seconds on Young Voices because I've read about it online. I think it's an interesting organization. If you would do me a favor and plug yourself, I would really be grateful for that. Lee Robbins is here for two reasons. Number one, he knows a lot about criminal justice reform, and the people that put this conference together thought it would be a good idea for Lee to be here. The second reason that Lee is here is because Irene, on our team, was out recruiting people in the hallway to come to this session and approached Lee and said, would you please come to our session on criminal justice reform? And Lee said, sure, what the heck? So we're very honored to have Lee here. Lee is a pastor. Lee is the founder of Vital Signs Reentry, which is, of course, is an organization that you have put together to help people reassimilate into society, people who have left incarceration. This, of course, is a huge problem in the United States, not just incarceration, but what happens after. The reason I'm going on and on about this is because one of my daughters is involved in alternative justice and some of the phenomena that happen on the way into and avoiding the way out of. So this is important. Again, to my family, you stay on the right side of my family, you're on the right side of me. So I care about this very much. So having said that, and Lee, if you wouldn't mind plugging yourself also when it comes time, tell us just, give us 20 seconds on Vital Signs Reentry. I would really appreciate that. So let me invite each one of you. Chase, you go first. Give us a couple of minutes on how you see criminal justice. Obviously, this is an area where we're all affected differently. Each one of our families is affected differently. We've all had different experiences with it. I think it's safe to say that whether you're libertarian or not, there is enough wrong with our criminal justice system for everyone of all stripes to be pissed off. Am I right about that?
Yeah.
So you might, I already got a few amens.
Yeah.
I like that. So we're not going to ask each one of you to solve all of the problems, but maybe give us, how you frame up, how you feel about it, and maybe what you think is the critical thing on which we need to push to make the biggest impact.
So I want to put a number out there for everybody. That's the number 1 in 12. 1 in 12 is the number of young people in this country who are going to grow up with an incarcerated parent at one point in their lives. The reason why that number is so high is, unfortunately, due to the fact that we have an over-criminalized society, we have far too many behaviors that are victimless crimes that lead to incarceration, that lead to the high number of people we have. As was mentioned to me by a friend earlier, it's not the fact that just we have a large number of people in jail, it's the fact that we have a large number of people in jail for things they shouldn't be in jail for. And because of that, sorry about that, because we have so many folks who are in jail right now and in prison, it has led to this breakdown in our criminal justice system. And I honestly, I come to it from also a personal position of having a family who have been incarcerated. I know how that affects families, I know how it affects people, and I know how reentry work is particularly important, particularly for people who have been incarcerated for long periods of time and are now having to come back out in society. So to me, I come to criminal justice with an empathic nature, and I want to talk about ways we can reduce the number of people who are going to prison because of our over-criminalized society, and then also how we can actually better treat prisoners and actually help people who are in prison improve their lives so when they get out, they have a better opportunity.
Very well said, thank you. Addison, you want to grab the microphone from Shane? It's always a difficult thing to do. I know
Yes.
I've had a challenge doing that myself. But please,
Okay.
give us how you frame this up.
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. Addison Hosner, attorney from Florida, and also Chief Operating Officer of Young Voices. I'll give you a quick plug.
Yep,
we have
please.
18 to 35-year-olds get published in print media as well as broadcast, whether on TV or on radio. We help accelerate careers, and we have a freedom, nonpartisan focus. So that is what we do. That's what we are. Please look us up, and if you have any ideas or people would like to be involved, send them our way. It's no cost to them. Okay, so criminal justice. I look at it, there's 3 main facets of our criminal justice system. You have law enforcement. From law enforcement, you have the prosecution, the judicial system. And then lastly, you have the prison system and the rehabilitation that needs to take place in a correctional facility. There's a breakdown, I believe, on all 3 parts of these. First and foremost, I think qualified immunity for police officers is creating a system of officers that can act without peril. They realize that there's no civil suits coming their way. They can treat people how they feel, and most of the time, they will get away from it. Unless the behavior has been constitutionally addressed in a court hearing or something, usually they will dismiss any cases brought against police officers civilly. So without that threat, I think you have an issue with law enforcement officers who are acting on their own volition without threat of potential consequences. We'll get into how I think we can fix that. 2, the prosecution and judicial system, I think we have an error here. And like Chase said, I approach all of this from an empathetic, compassionate place. At the end of the day, we're all humans, we should all fight for freedom. We shouldn't be wanting people to be going to jail. However, I think part of that has lost its way, where we have relaxed our abilities of our prosecution, which has resulted in plea deals and not putting cases on trial to either exonerate someone or correctly hand down a punishment, which will then land them in the correctional facility, which is step 3. We need to make sure that rehabilitation is actually taking place. Recidivism rates are far too high, and we're in my home state of Florida. We have 2 acts that I was very acquainted with as an attorney, the Baker Act and the Marchman Act. The Baker Act is for involuntary commitment of mentally incapacitated individuals to get them the help they need. The Marchman Act is for alcohol and substance abuse. The issue here is, though, the Baker Act would cost those involuntary committed individuals $300 a day. They usually cannot afford that, they don't get the help they need. They go back out into the streets and typically they commit violent crimes or non-violent property crimes, which then land them in jail, and the vicious cycle repeats. Same thing in the Marchman Act. So those are my 3 tenets that I look at this from, and I think we can find solutions to all 3 of them. And again, empathy, compassion, I think as humans is where we need to start. But being tough on the law doesn't mean you need to be tough on individuals on a personal level.
Well said. Lee?
My name is Lee Robbins, and I'm a full-time pastor. I also operate a reentry ministry. It's a one-stop shop for reentry. What we do is we do housing, jobs, transportation, life coaching. We start from the inside out. I believe reentry starts at entry, and then reentry, and then reintegration. The problem that I see with our system is to monetize. I talk to God quite often, and God says the criminal justice system is not broken, but it's fixed. And I said, what do you mean it's fixed? I said, what do you want me to do, God? He said, what do you do with any business that's monetized? That's a business. You quit giving it customers. And so my job and my assignment by God is to make sure the criminal justice system doesn't get any more customers. So if you've gotten a record, okay, I can't do nothing about that, but I can help you and empower you to never go back again. Myself, I believe that I was particularly called to the prison calling because I was falsely charged and I was falsely incarcerated myself. This is where I spent 3.5 years in a federal prison. Didn't know how I got there for paper crime, didn't have no money attached to it, employee got in trouble, and I found myself in prison. I was mad at God and everybody else until I got with the program. And when I got with the program, I started eating what they ate, I slept where they slept, I got treated like they were treated, and my pain pushed me into purpose, which is my book right now. So this is why they asked me to come. We have a documentary called First Week Out, and it will talk a lot about Bible science.
Wow, that is a really a powerful experience. Now, by the way, I want everyone to start thinking already about the questions that you want to ask, okay? Weird questions are okay, by the way. They're not required. But normal questions or strange questions are just fine. And being your mic, actually I'm going to take one of these microphones because I'm going to ask for it to be made available for all of you to ask questions. So you can just pass it down, or feel free to ask the first question yourself in just a moment. But I'm going to start out with the first question, and it's this is sort of a scenario question. Okay, so you're going to have to play along with me in the development of this scenario. Imagine in the future, and by the future I mean like an hour from now. This panel goes so well, the three of you become buddies, you go out and party, and just looking at you, I know how that's going to go. You get yourselves arrested. You find yourself in the back seat of a Memphis PD vehicle. You get taken off to jail. Okay? You get one phone call because this is a conspiracy. You don't get one call for all of them. And there's only one person in the United States that I know that all three of these guys know. So who do they agree that they're going to use their phone call for? You. Exactly. So they call me, and they tell me the following. First, they told me they didn't do it. Okay. You're worried. If you got any brains about you, you're worried. You're angry. If you got any brains about you, you're angry. And you're motivated. But I want one of you, whoever's got the phone first, to tell me what it is you're motivated about, or what are you angry about, or what it is that you're worried about. Who's got the phone first?
Shoot. I mean,
You're gonna give Chase the phone. How you doing, buddy? What happened?
So we got pinched by the Memphis PD.
Those guys suck.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
Yeah, they're listening right now, so.
I can imagine that. So how do you feel?
I'm a little pissed off.
I can imagine you would be.
I was just going peacefully up my dad.
Tell me about that. What pisses you off?
I mean, nobody said I couldn't drunkenly jaywalk across the street, so I mean, that's just what happens. Now, what angers me is the fact that the time was spent, the money was spent to take us off the streets when there are legitimate people who are probably committing violent crimes out there who are not getting the attention that the police should be giving them. So I'm upset that I'm in here and there are probably people who are stealing, raping, and murdering who are out there who aren't in here doing the time they should be doing. That's what upsets me when good people get picked up for just having fun with their friends on Beale Street.
And I share your pain because I know the guys you're with don't deserve to be there. I don't know about you, but I know these two guys don't deserve to be there. All right, pass Chase, to be fair, pass the phone. Let me talk to one of the other fellas. All right, now I understand, Chase was pissed off, so I get that. Enough of the anger. You're either motivated or you're scared to death and you're worried. Tell me, what's going through your mind right now, buddy?
Well, I'd like to analyze how we were picked up. I think there was an illegal search and seizure. I think our Fourth Amendment rights were violated. We weren't given our Miranda.
I already know that. This is Memphis.
And somehow, in some way, there's a gram of marijuana that ended up in my pocket. I don't know how that happened. It was violent. But that's a non-violent crime, and a crime that has no victim to it. We weren't hurting anybody. We weren't doing anything wrong. But unfortunately, right now, my frustration has the DA putting me as in Schedule 1 narcotic possession, which can land me a felony and completely derail my career and take away my bar license and ruin all the things I have going for me. So please tell my family I love them, and that I'll be home soon.
Yeah.
I'm gonna pass the phone to Lee.
And by soon, we mean around 2030. I said, pass it to me there, pass the phone, I want to talk to the pastor. Now, obviously, he was worried, that makes sense. Chase was pissed off, that makes sense. Both bright guys, right? And so it makes sense they'd be pissed and worried. But now I understand that one of you is motivated.
Yeah.
What are you motivated about?
Well,
And by the way, only a pastor could maintain his motivation in jail again.
again.
Tell me what you're motivated about.
Well, I'm pissed off like the rest of them, first of all, because I just feel like I was profiled. I was a reverse Oreo cookie. I'm pissed off. You're not supposed to use that term when you're a pastor, but I'm a pastor out of the box, so it doesn't matter. Motivated. I'm so motivated right now because you know what? I want to put this business out of business. Man, and I got a lot of clients out here now that I can work with and have Bible study with. And I'm so motivated at this time because I have a cause. I've been here, done this. I'm going to counsel these guys. They haven't been there. I'm going to recruit these guys to help me go recruit somebody else inside the prison. But real deal, you know, I am motivated at that point because it's not just, when I was working for the state of Georgia, I was not just had a job. I worked for probation and parole. This is after being convicted. And now I'm like, at this point now, I'm like, let's shut this thing down. Yeah. Let's get so motivated to the point. Now I got a potential president here. I got a lawyer that's working with young people now. Yeah. I'm going to collaborate with these guys in order to be a movement of change.
I like that. These guys
You can recruit us weirdest prison gang ever.
And I must say, these are 2/3 of the beginning of a good team, but they did get you in jail, so I want you to think that through. Now, I spent a lot of time talking about reforming how we manage police officers, having been a cop myself. That's not necessarily a good thing, I didn't mean it like that. And I spent a lot of time making fun of two groups of people. One, people who say, back the blue all the time, they're hard, you know, we got to stand behind them, pillars of the community, blah, blah, blah. This is what Republicans say. I'm a cop and I don't even talk that stupid, right? And I love police officers. 98% of the time, I love them to death. The other 2% is to death. You understand where I'm going? Not even I say anything that dumb. I also make fun of people on the far left who, not as often anymore, but until quite recently, were beating the drum about defund the police. And the reason I would make fun is because I really think that the hard work is in the reform. And when we just say defund, we sort of throw up our hands and say, well, the world sucks, they suck, we're just going to replace them all. Okay. Having said that, having made fun of both sides, is there some truth to either one of these things? Do any of you guys want to stand up for either we can't just take all the police behind the bar and shoot them because there's got to be something there worth standing up for? Or would any of you like to stand up for, maybe we don't mean literally defund the police, but maybe there's a reallocation of resources there that makes sense, that's a kernel of a truth behind that left idea. Does anyone want to stand up for these things that I sometimes make fun of? Yeah. I promise I won't make fun of you while you do it. Okay. Right? But take me to task on this.
It's not a black thing to me. It's not a white thing. It's a green thing. And it's not even a blue thing. It's a green thing to me, right? And I understand that proportionally there are more African Americans that get caught up in this system than any other system. But to me, it's not about being hard on crime or soft on crime. Be smart on crime. And the best way to be smart on crime is to empower the individuals who continue to commit or be caught up in the system of crime.
Well said.
So I'll take the reallocation of resources argument a little bit, and I alluded to this before. I think there'd be a wise opportunity here. I believe it's called the Peace Officer Standards and Training Programs. Each state has them, which is how police are trained, how to do their job. If we could find ways to improve that, to make sure the bad eggs don't slip through the cracks. That's, I think, step one. But step two, I mentioned qualified immunity. I think a big reform needs to happen there, and I think the best way we can do that is to figure out a way to create a malpractice insurance type policy for police officers. As an attorney, I have to have malpractice insurance for my practice. And what does that make me do? Make sure that I don't take actions on behalf of my client that are either unethical or going to lead down a path that is going to damage my client's case and cause a failure or a loss. They lose their child in court, whatever it may be. That's what keeps me honest, as well as just being a good person. Doctors have to have medical malpractice. So why don't we have malpractice for potential police officers? And that way, those who cannot maintain premiums because of their conduct will be forced out of the market just through sheer market forces at that point. I think that would correct the system in and of itself. There's probably a lot more to that. I'm not a police officer. I'm not sure how it even
Oh, you're on a good track.
Yeah, I think if we could figure out a way to really implement that I think is a great start. So I'll pass it to
Jason, I like this idea.
Yeah, I want to say me and Mike are both actually agree with liability insurance for officers for that exact reason, because it prices bad officers out of the bunch. When you're talking about reallocation of resources, the worst reallocation of resources is when the police officer does something wrong. They do happen to get a civil judgment, and that civil judgment comes out of the taxpayer. It comes out of the dole of other services that a city or county might be providing. Well, guess what? They can't provide for that as well, because they just have to pay for that guy who made that huge mistake and abuse someone's civil rights. So I'm somebody who, I'm not going to say defund the police, I'm not going to say back the blue. What I'm going to say is it is a function to have some sort of way to maintain law enforcement and to adjudicate laws and differences. Law enforcement has a function. What we do also need to be is always skeptics of power. Anytime there's authority or power invested in anybody other than ourselves, and even in ourselves, we need to be skeptics of that power. We need to understand where it comes from and that it can be corrupted. And that doesn't mean that we have to hate police, but it also does mean that we have to understand that while wearing a badge, they're representing the state and they're representing the interests of the state. And that doesn't mean that that person is a terrible person. It just means the industry that they're working for is probably not like the cleanest industry. It's part of government, and government is never perfect, and government can be quite abusive, especially if we are not being skeptics and maintaining a watchful eye on them. And so I'm not going to say, hey, all police are terrible, but I am going to say a lot of police departments are really badly run, and actually the disservice is not just the communities, but also those officers, because when there's a breakdown of trust, and I'm sure Mike can speak to this, if people do not trust the police in their community, the job of the police is made harder, it's made more dangerous, and so that's something we have to address, and one way to get that trust back is ending qualified immunity, is having a liability insurance policy, and making sure that we are constantly being skeptical of that power that police have.
That's well said. We have a question right here, sir. Either way to get to it first. It's coming.
Am I on?
You are.
Okay. Good afternoon, gentlemen. Thank you guys for being here. Thank you for teeing this up, Mike. I'm enjoying it. So I run a nonprofit in Mississippi that was founded by a group of conservative Mississippians called End It for Good. Our name is the War on Drugs. And our standpoint is basically, that drugs, drug use, and addiction is a human health issue, and we are unfairly burdening law enforcement with managing it. My question is what, since some of you are attorneys, law enforcement, you've been in the system, what ways do you think law enforcement would engage in terms of trying to think through health-based drug policies instead of punitive ones all the time? Because they tend to see people on a very frustrating basis continually coming out of the system. They have to call parents when their kid dies from consuming contaminated fentanyl that they didn't know they consumed. I know there's a lot to unpack there, but thank you.
Thank you.
I can tell you one thing law enforcement could do all over the country is pair with direct aid organizations that are providing things to consumers like Narcan, fentanyl testing strips, and clean needles, these things. I know it sounds a little controversial, but when you do these kind of things, you actually reduce the rate of disease through intravenous drug use, you reduce overdoses. There's actually a group called Shred the Stigma, Oklahoma. In the last year, they have saved over 600 people from overdoses because they had passed out free Narcan. And when they create that trust with those who are suffering from addiction, eventually when that person says enough is enough, they know somebody who's been through the suffering of addiction, they've provided them with the clean needles and the things that they need to be able to live their life, and they say, okay, that's somebody I know that's gotten themselves clean, that's the person I can trust to help me get clean. And so one thing that law enforcement could do is pair with those organizations. When they find an addict, find somebody that can help them out and provide those services to them, so when they're ready to get clean, they have a partner who's going to help them get clean.
Well said. And let me ask you guys, you can either address this immediately, but in a moment at least, or right now, I want you guys to answer, is America ready to end the war on drugs?
Yes.
I will definitively say yes.
Yes. America is ready. Well, how about, let me ask a harder question then. It seems so easy. I thought that was going to be a hard question. Let me ask a more difficult question. Is it politically ready?
No.
It will be
We
soon.
just went from a yes to a no.
No.
Anyone care to elaborate?
It will be soon. It's moving, and as generations get older, that's when the war on drugs is going to end, when Gen Z starts taking over their largest voting bloc because they're sick and tired of the war on drugs. It's time to support them. And as people who are millennials and older, we need to back them up and we need to help them in the war on drugs right now, today.
Agreed. Addison.
So I'll address the question. I'll also get to that. Chase did a good job talking about that law enforcement side. I'll take a step and go to judicial and what we can do there. And I think drug courts are the number one thing we can do until the war on drugs has ended. It's the next best thing we can do. And that is to not be ruining young people's lives or even just anyone's lives for that general with a stain on their record that now says they have possession. I think there is a directive that was put in place by President Biden actually to have the DEA reassess their scheduling of drugs. And this is rather absurd if you've looked at it recently. Schedule 1, which is the highest, has no medical value, nothing but addiction problems. Marijuana and psilocybin are on there. That's magic mushrooms in marijuana. Well, it's legal in multiple states, including, I recently moved to Washington, D.C. You can buy it on the street, same day, walk in, walk out, and that's in our nation's capital. And it's federally scheduled drug. Fentanyl, which has been alluded to, which kills people in the smallest dose, is Schedule 2. So, that's kind of critical, isn't it? I'll give you a few more. Ketamine's a 3, Xanax is a 4, and methamphetamine is a 2. So they believe magic mushrooms and shrooms are more deadly and dangerous and have no medical properties compared to that. And to jump on the rehabilitation programs, and I saw this a lot doing my work with Baker Act and Marchman Act, people who had mental illness and were committed or substance abuse. Without the research that we're allowed to perform on drugs like marijuana, it has been found to help people wean off their addiction to more powerful drugs, but until federal regulations are lifted, we are not allowed, our scientists across this country are not allowed to study it outside of a few states. I think Mississippi might be that state. It's the only place it can be grown, last I checked. So that's something that I would want to do, start from the judicial and go to the executive branch of our government and see if we can't get those laws passed further.
Lee, help us out. Is America ready to end the war on drugs, and is it politically ready?
I think America can end the war on not just drugs, but people. See, I think we categorize it as a drug and say it's the drug, it's the drug, it's the drug. But we don't deal with prevention. We don't deal with rehabilitation. We don't deal with the people. And we think, well, we're going to be safer if we just say war on drugs. We're not going to be safer if we do not invest into people and empower people. So I think we are ready. I think enough of us are ready, but still at the top, I'm not sure. Maybe Chase is the answer to that. I don't know. The way he sounded right there, I would vote for him today.
Absolutely. Do we have a question here?
Yes. About this idea to force police officers to have liability insurance. Well, it's a step in the right direction, but even better would be if they were just being liable, not in the sense that the taxpayer's liable, but that the actual perpetrator, the actual police officer who committed the crime would be personally liable to his victim and lose his home. When the victim sues him, that'd be so much better to give the right incentive to people.
It would be, but what we're, just to get these guys off the hook, what we're talking about is smaller things. We still need a system in which we can recruit people to do the job. The number of people who would do the job if you were risking your house if something went wrong at work on some random Tuesday is approximately 0. So the question is, how do you recruit people to do the job without having to pay them $1 billion, because that would defeat the purpose? How do you get people to do the job and create a situation where they are ultimately held liable, right? But where that liability is spread as it is in other high liability professions, like law, which isn't quite as high liability as it is for doctors. I'm pointing at Irene here, and I know that we've had other physicians at the conference. who recognize it is a relatively high liability profession. We want people to be doctors. We want to find a way to hold them accountable without just saying, well, they didn't mean it, so no harm, no foul. Irene is one of the leading experts on how vaccines are developed and distributed and regulated, and she can tell you that one of the big things that we did wrong with the pharmaceutical business is give them carte blanche against the liability associated with what goes wrong when something of a vaccine injures people, because it screws up the incentive system for pharmaceutical companies to do a good job of managing the risks and preventing things from going wrong. It also helps preventing pharmaceutical companies, for example, from going out too quickly with the vaccine until it's sufficiently tested and you know that it's safe. So we want to internalize how police officers take into consideration the damages that they do without running them all off the industry.
Yeah, I also think the liability insurance model also allows that's going to follow that officer from department to department if we're mandated that you have some sort of insurance policy. Theoretically, you could be a very wealthy person who decided they want to become a police officer one day, and they got the fine, they paid the fine, and they just moved across the country and they went to another department so they could abuse people there. But if you have an insurance policy, right, you're going to have a file with that. You're going to have everything follow you. They say, well, you had a claim against you here, you had a claim against you here. Well, we're not going to hire you anymore because you've priced yourself out of the marketplace. It's kind of similar to when we unfortunately had the abuse scandal in the church, right? They would move priests from parish to parish and not really talk about it. Well, that's kind of what happens sometimes with abusive police officers. They get moved from department to department. An insurance policy model will have that record following them. And it's also a marketplace. I don't want to deny insurance companies a marketplace to be able to make money off of those liability policies. So maybe if it's not required, it could be encouraged. Hey, you're either going to go bankrupt and lose your house and stuff if you screw up, or you can buy this low-cost policy from an insurance company and provide that liability for yourself so you don't have to worry about it. So
insurance will be the vehicle that allows the job to be done. We have a question over here.
Yeah, I'm going to go back to the rehabilitation part, and I'm actually going to go very personal right now. Very soon, my 8 and 10-year-old will likely have their biological father be sent to prison due to alcoholism. He's in the state of Texas. He's had 3 DWIs, which makes him a felon. He was, instead of having to go to prison for 2 years, they had said, you do 10 years of probation, you don't drink anymore, and you check off all these boxes, and you attend these classes, then you're good. You don't have to go to prison. But if you step out of line, you're going to prison. Well, I stayed with him for 3 years into the last DWI, and he's still on probation. Of course, he's an alcoholic. I divorced him because knowing my children were going to be in that environment, he needed to do it for himself. I went through the rehabilitation program with him twice. It's a joke. The state rehabilitation program for alcoholism is an utter joke. I had more success in private stuff, and I'm not even talking about Al-Anon as a family member. I'm not even talking about AA. I went to meetings like that. That, in my opinion, is a joke. There are other things out there, especially medicinally, that you can get prescriptions for that have actually a higher success rate. When we go and talk about rehabilitation, is there a way that we can start bringing these new scientific discoveries when we're talking about unlocking the brain and addiction, that we can bring that into rehabilitation to prevent these people from being in prison for something that we know is an illness?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll pick up my first on this one. First of all, I practiced a lot of family law in Florida, so I'm very aware of your exact situation. I've handled this exact case probably 100 times. I'm sorry you had to go through that. It's not a lot of fun.
No, it's not.
And to your point of the rehabilitation not working, in Florida, what I was accustomed to was the Marchman Act of substance abuse. We usually get the act passed, the judge would say, yes, this person is a detriment to the family or a danger, immediate or soon to be. 40 to 60% of all those who go through that Marchman Act program relapse on their substances. So that's the first thing we found, is that simply the only solution I had at law to fix an issue like your ex-husband, it wasn't working. And they'd come back and say, I have a domestic violence case or protection order sitting on my desk because I need to now protect the kids and the
I have
wife.
a TRO currently going on right now, and that's the reason why he might end up in prison, because he showed up at my 10-year-old's baseball tournament 3 weeks ago intoxicated.
That's a no-no. So yeah, everything you're saying is your situation is very unfortunate, and you're not alone in this country. I've got to see it firsthand. I'm not sure if there is an easy answer to it besides trying to get more funding and figuring out what isn't working in those rehabilitation programs for substance abuse. But using drugs, I kind of alluded to it. If we can figure out ways to tap into marijuana and psilocybin, magic mushrooms have been found to cure anxiety and depression in quite a few people when they microdose it. If we were able to relax our federal laws, we could do those studies and then hopefully, implement that potentially for those who wouldn't be at risk of forming an addiction or a desire to just, want to take more drugs. So that's the best I have for you.
Well, I'd like to add to that, and the reason why I know we talk about substance abuse, and yes, we bring in alcoholism with the substance abuse, but alcoholism obviously in our society is a lot more relaxed. It's more common. What is it? 1 in 4 people, even adults, are children of alcoholics. They are COAs. 1 in 4. That's insane. But what I'm talking about too is we're seeing an epidemic in alcoholism, especially in the millennial generation. And I'm a Zennial, so I'm still in there. But you're seeing it more, especially with COVID. What was it? We have now had 28% increase in alcoholism just in the past 2 years. So that's kind of one of the things that I'm seeing is we're sweeping alcoholism under the table because we want the war on drugs to go away. I want that to go away. I want us to find new things. But alcoholism just is getting swept under the rug. We're still showing the same videos that were produced in the 1970s to people now in those state-sponsored rehabilitation programs.
So I want to speak a little bit too. First off, I have major empathy for you. I have alcoholics in my family, and I understand the effect that can have on families, particularly young children, right? So first and foremost, I want to give my heart out to you. Secondly, when we talk about it, you're right, we should not take alcoholism off the table, and just because it's legal doesn't mean we should be destigmatized, that it's something we shouldn't care about or think about. It's absolutely, as we do in the war on drugs, and other drugs do become legal, we're going to have to make sure we worry about addiction with those drugs, and that the addiction does not become commonplace, right? And we can have people who can use, but not be, we still need to treat addictions in medical crisis, which alcoholism absolutely is. It just is as any other addiction. And so I agree with you, we need to destigmatize that, the fact that binge drinking is celebrated in culture so much, but somebody who wants to smoke a joint a lot of times does not receive that same treatment, right? So you're right. And when you talk about like technology and medical innovations to help with addiction, I believe all options should be on the table. If there's a medical intervention that can help somebody reduce the use of alcohol, that absolutely needs to be part of their rehab program if it's something that they can do. We should not abandon something because it might be difficult or, hey, it's a risky drug. I believe in safety, not efficacy. So if the drug is safe, you should be able to try it and see if it can curb your addiction.
Jeff, do you have a question?
Yeah, by the way, thanks guys. This is a great seminar. You guys are hitting stuff right on the head. But you're right. It's all about green. Let's start with the police protective orders. They're like any other public sector union. All they care about is those dues coming in and their political power. And like what Chase said, it's exactly like the priest scandal, where nobody ever gets fired or laid off or anything. They just get moved around to a different police department or whatever. But I've sat into so many closed sessions where we had 3,600 sheriffs in County Riverside. And these are some of the biggest lawsuits there are, is misuse of force. But it's not only that, there's this whole system of lawyers on both sides, and I'm bringing you into it now too, that make so much money from these. And there's just really a terrible thing that happens when a police officer goes out there and does everything exactly right. And then this agency will go ahead and decide to settle for $3 million instead of possibly getting a bad jury and paying $25 million. But I would say it sends that message to that officer that even though you did everything by the book and everything right with a really bad criminal or whatever, we're still going to settle and kind of pat you on, say, bad officer. So there's so much wrong with this completely. Bad prison guards are hard to get rid of. In California, nobody ever gets fired, and it just makes it worse and worse and worse. We have to get the public sector unions out of every level of it. And again, let's get more judges. like Judge Jim Gray, who was the first one to come out against the war on drugs back in the early 90s.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks very much. Other questions, or does anyone want to respond to that in particular?
Is there a demographic pattern to recidivism?
Yeah. Yes, I do believe that. I mean, I say it's not a black thing, white thing, but if you put more officers in certain neighborhoods, chances are you're going to get that demographics of people. You're going to profile that group of people strategically, and then you have stereotypes to go with that, and you got so on and so forth. And there may be more crime. I don't know. But here's the thing. I just believe that there is a process of recidivism that takes place because of demographics.
Maybe I could ask more generally, is crime, is our management of crime a piece of criminal justice reform? Or is it a separate conversation? Does anyone have an attitude toward that?
I believe it has to happen because reentry starts at entry. And so if you don't start inside the prison system and bring about reform there, I mean, not only from top into the actual system and programs, but starting there and then coming on out, it has to be.
I sense that, notwithstanding the fact that you and I have had different experiences, that you would agree with me that crime is the result of a lot of different forces, social forces, forces going on inside of a family, forces that are acting on that particular individual, but also the community. And it is not, crime is not the result of a particular individual making a particular decision on a particular day. And I think that in America, in the West, we have long looked at crime as though it were. And I think that we need to learn that that's not actually what causes crime. And so as I see it, and feel free to tell me I'm full of water, as I see it, how we manage to prevent crime, to your point, how we manage to prevent crime is part and parcel of how we reform criminal justice, because our system seems to be very good at incarcerating people, right? Which is why many of you probably, and I apologize if anyone was offended, the name of this session said something like #1 in the world. The people who run FreedomFest took something that we had shared in discussion about how I personally often say we have the world's most oppressive criminal justice system. And I believe that that is really true, because the way that you really need to evaluate how oppressive your system is, in its totality, is how many people go to jail, not how many people go to jail relative to the crime. Because if you have a system that fosters a great deal of crime, that's part of the problem, right? And so I feel as though, to your point, preventing the crime in the first place is a big part of how we reform criminal justice overall. Does this make sense?
Yeah.
Chase, you were about to say something.
Speaking of the recidivism issue and saying this is a racial component, I'd like to remind that for all crime, unfortunately, there is this issue of racial bias, because if you look at like cannabis, for instance, white guy and black guy, we use cannabis statistically the same amount, but black guys get arrested 3 times as much. Why is that? It's because there's a component, because there's a profit motive there, and because they feel like, well, we can go into these neighborhoods and use these populations, because statistically speaking, go into minority or populations without means, poor neighborhoods, it's easier to use those populations. So that's why you see that component. And lastly, I would say, is that true of alcohol? Lastly, I would say this. If there's anything you take away from this entire discussion, it is that there is a need for reform at every level. That means that from the first interaction you have with the police, the first time you go in front of a judge in a courtroom and interact with a prosecutor, the first day you enter prison, and the first day you get out and you start your post-release. Every single step of that needs real reforms, so that less people are being sent back to jail, so that people aren't going to jail in the first place. It is across the board. And so it's not a small issue, it's a very large issue. But together, all of us, if we start working towards those solutions, can fix the problem.
Thank you for saying so. Sir, you got a question?
You have a question?
Oh, do you have a question? Oh,
I just thought you
Elizabeth?
Yes, thanks. I heard, I'm very vague on the that there's some jurisdiction that's going to actually start paying jurors, the only people in the courtroom who don't have any incentive to be there, spending their time there. And I thought, how might that affect the criminal justice system? Jurors actually are paid to help us get better juries of peers and so forth.
That's a really interesting question. It's obviously been a recruiting problem to get people to serve. How does that make you feel?
Having done voir dire and selecting a cross-section of the community, I can tell you, you usually don't want a jury. Your cross-section community, despite trying to be objective, that's what we ask for. We try to disqualify through preemptive challenges or through something they say to a response to a question. And even when you do your best, you can still tell when a juror has already made up their mind halfway through a case. Now, if you are incentivizing jurors to come in with money, that tells me, that issue is a whole separate thing. But for me, it's always been 98% of federal cases settle. They take plea deals. This might be a way to actually increase jury trials, which may make justice more just, per se. Most plea deals are given out because we give an ultimatum. There's statutory minimum sentencing laws, and those need to go away as well. Every case needs to be evaluated on its evidence and the testimony provided, and come to a decision on whether or not the punishment fits the crime. For example, I believe 2 to 15 years is burglary felony 1 in DC. Depending on the case line and how it actually plays out, they'll actually dump it down to about 6 months in a misdemeanor. But that's through the lead prosecutor. So statutory minimums need to go away. And if we do that, then we're putting on trials. We need more jury members. We need jury members who are wanting to be a part of the system. That's going to help a lot of people get out of prison who are saying, okay, 15 years is your minimum sentence. But this plea offer we're putting in front of you is 4 years, then 2 years of probation or house arrest. And if you don't take it, well, we're going to put it on trial. We're going to pursue the maximum. What do? They take the plea. So,
Thanks for that.
So I'm going to rewind it just a little bit to the proposal for malpractice insurance for police officers. And the specific aspect I have with that is training. Under that system, is the insurance carrier incentivized to help pay for training? What motivates this is I like watching police shooting videos. And oftentimes you'll see a terrible situation where somebody gets killed because the officer had very poor training. And it's not a malicious act, it's a terrible accident.
So when I worked at when I was in my corporate job in the maritime trading industry, we were given health insurance, and our health insurance provided us incentives that would lower our premiums. If you can show that you're walking every day, if you show that you're a non-smoker, if you show that you go to a gym, and they even provided incentives like gym memberships for us to go do those things because they knew overall it would lower the cost of them having to do visits. I would be less likely to get sick, less likely to go to a doctor, and less likely to cost them premiums. So I absolutely think in a world where officers are given liability insurance of some kind, I think that there is actually a market incentive for firms and insurance companies to go, okay, well, let's make sure that you're certified the correct way. Let's make sure you have the correct training that we want in the marketplace. That's a market incentive to provide for better serving officers, and to lower their insurance premium. If you could show, hey, you have done this certified program that we think will make your job better and you do better at your job, we're going to lower that premium for a little bit for you. And that encourages officers to seek additional training. So that way, there's less money getting taken out for the insurance policy. And if the policy is coming from, like, say, in Georgia, the Atlanta Police Foundation, let's say it's coming out of there, well, they will then encourage their officers to go through those programs so they're not spending as much money on the insurance premiums. So absolutely, there's a market incentive to do that.
And that's, of course, the way you would want the market to work. Unfortunately, the vast majority of police shootings that are illegal or that are merely unfortunate but deemed to be legal are mistakes. Even those that are illegal are typically mistakes. They're just real bad judgment by someone who's never been in that situation before or who hasn't been in that situation before enough. And events just get out of a person's control. There's, what we call the stupid loop, where you keep thinking the same thing over and over again and you don't know how to break out of it because, as everyone knows, when you're in these types of high-stress situations, the first thing you lose is your ability to, coordinate your fine motor skills. But the second thing you lose is the ability to think anything but one thought at a time. And this is what leads to these horrific situations happening. you're absolutely right that further training would help a great deal. The other thing that would help a great deal is restructuring how it is that these situations come up in the first place, meaning having multiple officers instead of just one, having accountability structures in place so that officers are more incentivized to say, whoa, you know, how about you sit down just for a second, right? Because typically the stupid loop happens to one person at a time. There's usually someone there who is just unwilling to cross the blue line and say, look, you're in a loop, have a seat. Yes, sir.
So I heard the conversation around, the conversation has addressed police brutality and abuses, things of that nature. One aspect of criminal justice that has not been discussed here is the judicial aspect. You have officers who are arresting individuals, but then once they get to the judicial aspect of it, they're released back into the street with absolutely no consequences for the behaviors or the actions that they've done, which then sends a tacit understanding that there are no consequences or repercussions for egregious behaviors in society. How do you propose, or what suggestions do you have that we hold the judicial aspect or the judicial
System
practitioners accountable to be able to be part of that?
And let me apologize, a tremendous question, and one on which we could spend hours. We have -7 minutes. We're now 7 minutes overtime. Okay. So in the interest of saving those 7 minutes, does anyone, Lee, would like to give us, Lee, a say 11-second answer to how to fix the judiciary system in the United States?
I just believe they need to be more proactive so we won't get into the problem in the first place. I just believe that that's like some of these young kids getting into trouble. Let's see if we can make sure that they are part of, make them pay the consequence for their crime, but put them in a circle. I forgot what they call that. Put them in a circle where they begin to be accountable, but also get with the victim, and the victim get with them, and then what happens is they resolve the problem. First of all, by understanding the trauma that this child has been going through and the pain this child has gone through.
Well said. Best 11 seconds in criminal justice reform.
God's
Ladies and
time.
gentlemen, these are 3 great sports, are they not?